Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain Khan. Today's topic is Joe Biden's new American presidency and his future policies. Today, the guest of our show is a senior academic, Dr. Claude Rakisits, who is an honorary associate professor in the Department of International Relations at the Australian National University in Canberra. He has been working on South Asian issues for over 30 years, and his PhD is pretty interesting. It's on Pakistan. Welcome to our show, Dr. Claude Rakisits. This is Zain Khan. It is a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me on your program again. Good to be here.
Let's get to the first question. What's your summary of Trump's policy on China, Iran, Middle East, and even South Asia?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a big question, so I'll try to go very quickly over that. Let's take it one at a time. China. The relationship that President Trump had with China to start with was pretty good. He liked President Xi. As you know, President Trump likes strongmen. Some people call them autocrats. And he actually got along with him quite well. But this didn't last very long. Certainly at the beginning, President Trump wanted China to open up its trade borders and to loosen up a bit of its trade policies. And of course, President Xi wasn't going to play ball on that one. And very quickly, they started imposing each other trade barriers. And I suspect that this hurt more the United States economy than the Chinese economy. Under Trump, he continued, of course, the freedom of navigation joint operations in the South China Sea. This, of course, was started long before with President Obama. Nothing ever happened there, which is good news. There was, obviously the Chinese didn't like it, but there was no friction at that point. President Trump was, of course, highly critical of the treatment of the Uyghurs in Western China, and of course, what was happening in Hong Kong. That's just in a nutshell about China. Turning to Iran, the relationship with Iran was always going to be bad from the very beginning. Candidate Trump in those days had made it always very clear that as soon as he got elected, he would rip up the Iran deal, which he did. And he reimposed sanctions against Iran, which made it very difficult then for the US companies to actually do deals and do business with Iran. This, of course, had the effect of course, pushing Iran closer to China, which I thought was against what Trump would have liked. But nevertheless, that's what happened. A couple of times he tried to, it looked like he was going to go into some sort of military operations against Iran, but at the last minute, he pulled back, and that's good news for everyone. Turning to the Middle East, big things happened under the Middle East. To start with, of course, it were actually quite seismic shifts in the Middle East. He managed to get the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco to not only recognize Israel, but also to have diplomatic relations with them. And I suspect that Saudi Arabia, and that's a big one, could pretty much be the next one off the rank in actually recognizing Israel. Let's just watch that space. But the thing that's interesting about that is, of course, that lines up everyone. Israel now is no longer feeling as isolated. And now those four countries I mentioned before can all be sort of together against Iran. So this is a very, very important shift. And even President Biden, when he was campaigning, has hinted that he thought this was a pretty good deal. So that's something that Biden will be working off. Turning to South Asia, looking at Afghanistan, President Trump from day one wanted to get out of Afghanistan. That was the bottom line. And he just felt this was a useless war, and he may have a point. And so he was determined to have a peace agreement. Some people would call it an exit agreement, but anyway. And eventually he did get an agreement in February of 2020 so that he could eventually pull out the troops in May. So we'll see what happens there. The relationship with Pakistan was fine. He had a very good relationship with Prime Minister Imran Khan, which was always good news. And again, the relationship with Pakistan was very much through the prism of what can Pakistan do on the Afghanistan front. And this was always important and still remains very important. We can talk about that later. The relationship with India, again, very well. It went very well. Again, he liked Prime Minister Modi, strong man. They got along very well. But then he also got along very well with President Xi, Kim Jong-un, and Putin, all these other strong men. And of course, President Trump very much turned a blind eye on what Prime Minister Modi was doing in India, of course, while he was there at a big gathering, President Trump in Delhi. Muslim heads were being kicked in downtown Delhi, but no one said a word about that. And the final point about India, which is really important, is that under Trump and with Modi, there was a deepening of the relationship through the quadrilateral security dialogue, which of course consists of the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. And that's, again, a very important point to remember. I hope I covered everything. There's a big question.
Yeah, it was certainly a big question. My second question is that looking forward, now Joe Biden is in, Trump is out. What sort of a relationship can we expect the United States to have with Pakistan?
Well, the good news is that President Biden knows Pakistan well. When, of course, don't forget President Biden, when he was senator for 44 years, which is a very, very long, well, not 44 years, because it was, of course,
He was also vice
vice
president.
president for 14. But that's exactly right. So all these things together, he's had a long public career, very dedicated to the public, in the public sphere. But he knows Pakistan. He's been several times. And so I suspect he would have met Prime Minister Imran Khan. I am sure of that. He knows everyone in the world. That's the thing with President Biden. So I think there's good mood, I think, from Biden towards Pakistan. Now, of course, the relationship with Pakistan, as with Trump, will be deeply influenced by how the 2020 peace agreement in Afghanistan is actually implemented. And quite frankly, it's not going well at all. The Taliban are not implementing their side of the bargain. And now what's happening is under President Biden now, there's a formal review of the whole agreement, and to see how they're going to move it forward. Because don't forget that part of the agreement is that the Americans and NATO troops have to leave by the 1st of May of this year. So that's only in 4 months' time from now. I suspect that's not going to happen. I suspect they'll put a hold on that and probably review it again in 6 months or maybe in a year's time. Now, a lot of people in Pakistan will feel that this is a betrayal by the Americans, because the Pakistanis have put a lot of effort in pushing this deal, pushing the Taliban, in trying to have an agreement. And they will feel let down. I can understand that, but the fact is, it's a lousy deal. And if it is a lousy deal, maybe it's time to review it and try to have a new one. And perhaps it's possible under a new administration under President Biden. So there's that. Another thing that's a bit of an issue, of course, and the timing is very bad, is, of course, the recent release of Ahmed Omar Said Sheikh, who, of course, was accused, but then acquitted of the beheading, of course, Richard Pearl back in 2002. Now, he, of course, spent about 18 years in jail for this, and it went through the whole judicial system in Pakistan. So that's all been done. But just recently, the Supreme Court of Pakistan decided to release him and uphold the decision by the Sindh High Court. Now, the problem with this is that, as far as Americans are concerned, the perception is, and in life, perception is often reality, the perception is, here's a terrorist who's actually going to be let off the hook and scot-free. And that's the perception. And the fact and the proof that this is a big deal for the Americans is that when Jake Sullivan called up Foreign Minister Qureshi, the first thing on the agenda was Richard Pearl. So this is bad timing, and it's going to set a bad tone to start with. Now, I'm sure that can be fixed down the road.
Dr. Rakisits,
So let's
I have
see
a
what happens
comment
with
on
that.
this Umar Sheikh thing. I mean, let's imagine this guy was
Yeah,
in the United States, right?
yeah.
I mean, this guy would like obviously get life imprisonment because obviously they're against the death penalty. I mean, at least most states. So why would they expect any different from any other country if they're following the same morality? I mean, the guy had 18
No, I
years in
agree. I
prison,
agree.
right?
Well, actually, no, no. Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. And the fact is, there's always double standards in international relations, as we know that there's nothing new there. Let's not be naive here. But the fact is, some states do actually believe in the United States. Some states actually do
Yeah,
believe
yeah.
in the death penalty. But you're right. He has spent 18 years in jail. He has. We don't want to spend too much time on this, but he has recently apparently put out a statement or written statement saying that he had a minor role in this whole event, in the event of the beheading. What does a minor role mean? Who knows? And I don't want to start getting into that too much. But the fact is, what is important is that the government of Pakistan is keen and has made it clear to the Americans that it's keen to try to overturn that decision. But there's only that much they can do. I mean, the judiciary in Pakistan, like in most countries, is independent from the executive. And so there's only that much they can do. But even the government of Pakistan realizes perceptions, it's not a good look, certainly to start a new relationship with a new administration. I think we'll leave it at that. And, but the other thing that's really important is because the timing is bad again, because as you probably know, at the end of this month, there's the Financial Action Task Force meeting, the FATF meeting in Paris to take Pakistan off the gray list. This is a list about, our countries doing enough to counter terrorism, but also finances of terrorism. My money is on, they will be taken off the gray list. I may be one of the few people in the world who thinks this, but I do think they will be taken off the gray list. It's important that they be taken off the gray list. They've done a lot of things
It's
recently
very
that should
important.
help.
Very important for the
It's very
economy.
important. And also, one of the big things they did recently, just a few weeks ago, they've locked up the leader of the LET, Zakiur Rahman Lakvi, and that is very big because he apparently was involved as well in the Mumbai 2008 attack. So the Pakistanis, I think, have done a lot in that direction, and I think that's why I feel confident that they will be taken off that gray list. But let's watch that space. We can talk about that later. The other big thing in the US-Pakistan relation is, of course, the whole deepening of the relationship between Pakistan and China. This is big, including the whole CPEC. There is no two ways about it. Americans know about it, and that's absolutely, obviously, in Pakistan's choice. And it's doing this as well because, of course, Pakistan realized that the United States and the Indians are having a deepening relationship over many years now, and it probably will go even deeper now under Biden. So this is important to remember. The thing that the Americans are a bit worried about is that this whole CPEC and the roads and that are being built from Gwadar to Western China are effectively going to make down the road make China a two-ocean nation. Put differently, Pakistan is a force multiplier for China. So I'll leave it at that. We can talk about some more later.
Yeah. After Pakistan, the most important country in the region is Afghanistan, right? How do you see Joe Biden's policy towards Afghanistan? I mean, you've mentioned in summary how they're going to approach the peace deal, but overall, Afghanistan, what do you see?
Well, again, as I mentioned before, I really feel sorry for the people of Afghanistan. I mean, they've effectively been in some sort of military strife, conflict, civil war since 1973, the Dawood coup. It hasn't been good ever since, ever. Whether it's domestically or induced from external forces, whether it's the Russians coming in, or better known as the Soviets in those days, or the Americans coming in, and NATO, and whoever. And so you really, really feel sorry for them. You wonder, what did they do in their previous lives to deserve this? And the fact is, it is an extremely difficult situation. I'm not sure how Biden's going to deal with it. Again, I think there'll be, as I said, there'll be a review. People back in Washington, where I was last time you interviewed me, I think, they always put a sort of a rosy picture, even when the Americans were there in big numbers, big numbers. They, oh yes, everything's on track. And everyone in the think tanks knew nothing was on track, absolutely nothing. And so now with 2,500 troops left, which is just nothing, but it's symbolic, left in Afghanistan, the Americans are still there. And personally, I feel that the Americans should leave the troops there, even if it's 5 years, 10 years, simply to send a message to the people of Afghanistan that they haven't been completely abandoned. It's really important. It's important for people, country, business who want to invest in Afghanistan, that they are not completely abandoned. Because if the last American troops and NATO troops leave, it will be a psychological blow, not so much military, but a psychological blow. And I'd be basically handing over the keys to the palace in Kabul to the Taliban. That's as simple as that. And I'm not sure what's the solution. I think they need to sit down again and rework that whole peace agreement. But it's what happened in Afghanistan, of course, will have a big impact in Pakistan. That goes without saying.
How do you see the Iran's nuclear deal with the United States? I mean, do you see Biden? How do you see Biden with Iran?
Well, again, this is again a difficult issue. It's a very, and let's just give me a couple of seconds about that. When you talk Iran and you talk America, you talk big problems. You have to look back at the history. 40 years ago, precisely 40 years ago, under a different Democratic administration of Jimmy Carter, okay, who was utterly humiliated by the Iranians with a hostage taking of 50 diplomats for 444 days. The reason I mention this, I used to live in North America in those days, in Canada precisely, is that every day on the channel on CBS, NBC, and ABC, there was no CNN in those days, incidentally. Maybe that was a good thing. The fact is, every day it would start with, this is day 123. This is day 324. So there is a massive baggage between the Iranians and the United States. And the Americans have never got over that whole event, ever. And this is something to always remember when thinking about Iran, United States negotiating some sort of deal. Now, having said all that, Biden's, of course, keen on the Iran deal, okay, because he was vice president under Obama. But it's not simply a matter of simply going back to the deal. Don't forget, the deal was ripped up 4 years ago, and Iran, started, developing more of its nuclear weapons, including its missile program. And I'm not sure if it's actually possible to go back to the Iran deal. I'm not even sure if the Iranians want to go back. And Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, said that Iran's only a few weeks away from having a bomb. So again, I don't know if it's gonna be possible to actually go back to the Iran deal.
Imagine Iran having the bomb. Do you think it's going to be a hard situation diplomatically for Biden? I mean,
it will be extremely difficult. And I think if Iran does have the bomb or detonates one as a showpiece or whatever, I think it would again reimpose sanctions, the already American sanctions, but it would be bad not only for the Biden administration, it would be bad for the whole region. And so I'm actually not sure what would happen. It would just completely change the equation. And if you put into that mix the whole missile development that Iran is developing, then you really have a toxic mix. But one thing that Biden would want to do, going back to the Iran deal, is that before signing up again to an Iran deal, is that the Biden administration would want to review and consider the whole Iranian behavior in the region, its behavior towards in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, because that's one of the major flaws with the Iran deal is, of course, it does not take into account Iran's regional dealings and behavior. And so I think Biden would want to definitely look at that and include that in any new deal.
Now, when we look at the United States and China, we don't see the temperature decreasing. Trump is gone. Biden is in. I was expecting some major changes. I mean, I'm only seeing cosmetic changes where President Biden is saying that let's not call the coronavirus as the Chinese virus, and but I don't see the United States policy changing when it comes to China. I mean, how do you see it? I mean, you're the expert. How do you see
No,
Biden dealing with China?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Zain. For any country, their strategic and fundamental national interests do not change simply because there's a change of an administration, that whether that's in the United States or in Pakistan. Okay, that's the bottom line. Okay, now it's not going to fundamentally change under Biden administration. No way, absolutely. So you can rest assured nothing's going to change there. There may be a change in tone, which is not difficult given the previous administration. But the fact is, President Biden will want to try to have a better working relationship. Bearing in mind, of course, the national interests don't change. It will want to. So, and it'll want to try to work in areas where there's something they can work on. And the big one is, of course, climate change. That's a very big one. But President Xi and his administration made it clear, 1 minute, we are not going to have different compartments where we have good buddies in one area and we're not good buddies. That's not going to wash. So President Xi's already made that very clear. He's not keen in that approach. It's got to be a positive approach throughout, across the whole waterfront, and not simply in one area. So I think that there could be a few problems there. I think President Xi may well try to test the waters a bit militarily with the new Biden administration, possibly over Taiwan, South China Sea, and see how President Biden reacts. Now, that's a very dangerous game to play because if there's kinetic interaction between those two countries, things can get out of hand very quickly. So that is something that could possibly happen, possibly during one of these freedom of navigation operations that the Americans conduct on a regular basis. And of course, under Biden, the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Corporation's security, will of course continue to develop to try to have a coalition in that area. So Biden will also want to continue show interest in the region, in the Indo-Pacific area, and this is of course important for its allies, including Australia.
Now the Democrats, because obviously Joe Biden is the new president of the United States and he's a Democrat, they're sensitive towards human rights if we compare them with the Republicans. That's their approach, right? Their approach is human rights. And how do you see Biden reacting on the Kashmir's human rights violations by Modi's government in India? How do you see them resolving the issue? Do you see them resolving the issue? What's going to be their stance?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very pertinent question, especially today, given that this is Kashmir Solidarity Day. The fact is this. The good news is that you're right, absolutely right. The Democrats, generally speaking, do put more emphasis on human rights. than the Republicans have in the past, generally speaking. Biden has made clear that human rights will be a central pillar of its foreign policy. That's true too. That's all very good news. The other good news is Biden, when he was, of course, in the in the Senate, made several statements, but also in his campaign and in some of his written manifestos, he said, and I quote, "The Indian government should take all necessary steps to restore rights for all the people of Kashmir." That's written on black and white. So this is very, very important. Kamala Harris, his vice president, also has said back in 2019 that she said, and I quote, "We have to remind the Kashmiris that they are not alone in the world." Okay, so that's all very good news, and that should give hope to the Kashmiris. However, having said that, and the problem is, going back to what I said before, they've got a deepening relationship with India, with Prime Minister Modi, and I suspect that President Biden will put a bit of pressure on Prime Minister Modi, either privately and publicly, on Kashmir, and not only Kashmir, but also on general human rights in Pakistan, in India. But it will only go so far. It will probably suggest and recommend to Prime Minister Modi that the UN Security Council resolutions that go back to 1948 should be implemented, including a referendum. But I believe that they will only push so far. And what I mean by that is they are certainly not going to sanction the Indian government if it does not change its behavior towards Kashmir. I just don't see that happening, because at the end of the day, the most important thing the Americans have to think about is a big geostrategic picture, and that is China's relationship with the United States, and it wants India on its side, and does not want to basically waste, I don't want to use that word, burn good political capital over Kashmir when it comes down to dealing with China.
Now, the other
So
day,
sadly, Kashmir is going to fall by the wayside on this one.
the other day we saw the American singer Rihanna put her weight behind the farmers, the Delhi farmers.
I saw that.
Then we saw that the climate change activist Greta, and then we saw America's Vice President Kamala Harris's niece tweeting in favor of the protesters in India. Now, that gives an impression of how the Democrats might be looking at things. I mean, Modi is a rightist. The Democrats lead towards the left. I'm asking a similar question, but in a different context. How do you see Joe Biden while he's dealing with Modi? I mean, do you see hurdles while they're both when they're both going to be dealing with things? Because obviously Joe Biden's worldview is going to be different from what Modi's worldview is.
Again, a very good question, and it's very, very pertinent. And again, I think the way he's going to deal with Prime Minister Modi, on just Prime Minister Modi's general approach to dealing with minorities, and particularly, of course, the Muslim minority, which is actually a very, very big minority, will be very important. But again, as with Kashmir, Biden and the administration will be critical. How far they will go, again, as I said, I don't think they'll go very far. They may probably turn a blind eye. And let me just incidentally, it's not only the United States, it's all Western countries, because the Indian government over many years, has been very, very effective at marketing. And as we know, with the disinformation that they had, that came out just recently, they've been very good at marketing that they are the largest democracy in the world. It's a narrative that the West loves. It's a narrative that they have gobbled up, and it's a narrative that do not want to counter. And so it's a narrative that not only governments take, but even think tanks, academics, universities. And there are very few people who actually stand up to it. Why is that? Who knows? It's I think it's a bit of groupthink. People don't like to go against the thing. They don't feel comfortable with that. And of course, in governments, it's also, again, it all goes back to the whole big geostrategic picture, the ultimate and the increasing friction between the United States and China. And so there's a feeling that maybe we should just not bother the Indians too much over what they do in, on the human rights front. We'll sign off on all these treaties and talk a lot about humanitarian law and international human rights law, but we'll not make too much noise because at the end of the day, we want to have India on our side. And that's the way, that's the narrative. And that's why Prime Minister Modi gets away with it, and he knows it. And even though Biden might make more noises publicly over the years, I wish him well. I don't think it's going to make much difference. The one big difference is
they're not going to look towards regime change of any sort. Like they're not
No, that's not going to happen.
You're going to see Joe Biden, who claims to be one of the champions of human rights. He's a Democrat, dealing with Modi when it comes to India. They're going to work together. You see that happening?
Yes, absolutely. And because exactly for the reasons I gave you, because they want India on its side. And don't forget the recent clash in Ladakh between China and India. The Americans have been very supportive of the Indians on this front because of the whole, again, the big geostrategic picture. One way for the Americans and other countries to be able to deal with that internal conflict they may have, dealing with Prime Minister Modi, who's not always a very good Democrat when it comes to minorities, is to be much more multilateralist, which Democrats generally are than Republicans. So as we know, President Biden signed within a couple of days of taking over, signed an executive order to rejoin the WHO, to rejoin the Paris
Agreement.
Yeah, Paris Agreement, all that. And of course, the Americans will use a lot of the other multilateral forums like the United Nations Security Council, United Nations Human Rights Council, the WTO, to try to deal with India, but in a multilateral setting, and to find solutions, international solution, through consensus with friends, allies, and like-minded countries. That's one way for them to get around having to deal directly, bilaterally, with Prime Minister Modi.
You wanted to add something?
No, that's it. I mean, it's been great to talk to you again, Zain. It's been a long time. It's a lot of things are going to be moving, I think, for the next few years in Pakistan and South Asia in general. I'm not sure if it's all moving in the right direction, but if there's a goodwill, maybe there's always a possibility of things going better.
Thank you so much, Dr. Claude Rakisits, for being on Tactical Talk. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Zain, for inviting me, and I'll see you next time.
This was Claude Rakisits, a senior academic. We were discussing the future policies of the new American president, Joe Biden. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, keep on watching Tactical Talk. Take care. Goodbye.